Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. Before we get started, I urge you, as always, to spread the show, share the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast with a coffee lover, tell someone you know about the show. I do appreciate it, and hit subscribe so you catch every single episode. Today, Dr. Coffee is back for some more exciting coffee news. What's up, Dr. Coffee?
Well, it's another day above ground living the dream, my friend.
You're darn right it is. And where there is life, there is news. We've got a bunch of coffee news today, man. Are you ready to dive into these articles?
Yeah, there really has been a plethora of coffee news in the last month, so that's pretty exciting.
It's funny because we're a pretty small show here. We're a pretty niche show. But I do see more and more people getting into the science behind coffee, writing about the science behind coffee, these sorts of things making it into Google Feeds. Now, I know Google Feeds are tailored for the individual, and I'm sure Google knows that I'm a huge coffee fan, but I do see more and more interest in this subject, and I hope that our little show, I know that there's some industry insiders who listen to this. I hope our little show maybe contributes to that. So we've got some cool stuff on the menu today.
I'm ready to jump in.
So the first one, this is very, very interesting to me. I saw a ABC News article. It's titled, "These are the molecules that help make coffee awesome." So I had to click on it. It turns out it is an article pointing to a research study about mouthfeel. These researchers did an in-depth study into what makes coffee give certain mouthfeels, which compounds in it specifically. And they narrowed it down to a couple specific, what are they, molecules or compounds that create these different mouthfeels, right, Dr. Coffee?
Yeah, so the ones we look at are called the company that we look at is the American Chemical Society. And so they have a fall meeting every year. Every fall. That's why it's called a fall meeting. Not because people fall, but because it happens in the fall. And when it occurs, they usually have these papers presented to the audience. I mean, this is a big deal. The American Chemical Society is a big deal. And they'll typically have about 7,000 presentations. I've attended the ACS once. It was way over my pay grade. But at the last one, they went through the compounds that contribute to mouthfeel. So let's make sure we understand what mouthfeel is. Mm-hmm. So when you take a sip of coffee, there are chemicals that lead a sort of coating on the inside of the mouth. You talk about terms of astringency and chalkiness, and that's all called mouthfeel.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like you've eaten a bite of food or something. It feels like there's something in your mouth or something coating your mouth, and you're right. There's different kind of flavors of it.
Exactly. So when people drink things like wine or coffee, and they'll say, "Oh, I subscribe certain notes to it." That's part of it, but more part of it is also the way it feels in the mouth, and all that is summed up as mouthfeel.
Right, and I guess it makes sense. No one's really done this research in depth. We didn't really know what contributed to that. There's all sorts of different molecules and chemicals in coffee. But it looks like these researchers had identified a few. They isolated melanoidin compounds. Oh, we've covered melanoidins on this show before.
Yes, we have.
Right. They're formed by the Maillard reaction, during the browning and roasting process. And what are the two compounds they identified? Oh, these are a mouthful. These are a mouthfeel.
It's 3 and 4.
Let's call them 3 and 4. It's called 3 and 4
caffeoylquinic.
Yeah, caffeoylquinic acid. Yeah. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And those correspond with mouth coating feel.
Right. So they found more than just that, but those were the two main contributors. And these are small molecules, so they're not in large quantity in the coffee, and they're not large molecules in the coffee.
Wow.
They're small molecules, and they contribute to that perception of having that chalkiness in the mouth. And the other thing that contributed to the chalkiness was amino acids.
Right. Yeah. So there's a couple different, again, flavors of that mouthfeel. I liked one sentence here in the research study said that specifically the mouthfeel with the 3 and 4C acid, as we said, the sensation subsided with increased concentrations. So you're right, very low amounts of this creating this kind of perception.
Correct. Think of taking something with a squirt of lemon in it versus lemonade.
Right.
So you drink some tea, since most people don't put lemon in their coffee. Hey, maybe that's a new product. Dr. Coffee's lemon coffee.
Hey, I like it.
Hey. But you put a little squeeze in your tea, and while you have the taste of the tea, you also have this little astringent of the lemon drops.
Right.
That's different than drinking a lemonade.
Yeah, it's almost more, sometimes it can be more pronounced as the accentuation.
Exactly.
Interesting, man. Very, very interesting. Yeah, this is a cool study. Anything else you found in here that you want to ping before we move on? Very, very interesting study. I would suggest the listeners check it out themselves.
Yeah, so the only thing that I want to make sure everybody understands is that there are terms with coffee. So like body, when they talk about coffee body, that's what they're talking about. Is it's more than just a liquid going down your throat. There's something to it, almost like the remnants of toothpaste after you spit from brushing. so those remnants are what the team in this study set out to isolate.
Right.
And they isolated 3 or 4 or 5. They actually isolated 12 different fractions, but they talked about only 3, 4, or 5 ones that gave the mouthfeel to the coffee.
Super interesting. And like you said, I've seen these cuppers, they go after this body. They'll sip, really slurp the coffee hard or chew the coffee. And they're trying to dive into that mouthfeel, that body, and get a real experience out of it. Very cool. Super.
Well, what I think was most interesting is up until they did this study, I always used to think that the mouthfeel was attributed to the sugars or the fats, either that's in the coffee or that we add to the coffee. I never really thought of the mouthfeel as being caused by other chemicals.
Or yes, exactly. Very, very small amounts of chemicals. Yeah, I felt the same exact way. It's like lipids would maybe coat your tongue. Like that's where my mind went to. I love it though, man. More coffee research, the better.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to the second one here. And this one's a no-brainer. Oh my God, I've been crowing about this for a while. I should have brought it up on this show so I could refer to an older episode. Maybe I've said it sometime on this show. Maybe a hardcore listener can dig that up. But you sent me an article titled "Most Coffee Makers Are Crawling with Germs and Growing Mold, Experts Say. Here's why." I've always said that coffee makers, specifically office coffee makers, are the dirtiest thing in the world. I think it was one of my favorite podcasters. He said, that's worse than the toilet seat because everyone's grabbing it, all the mold inside the machine. It's just really, really funny to think about how little that thing gets washed. But talk to me about mold and yeast growing in your coffee maker.
Yeah. So, we've talked before about the fact that we recommend something like Purity Coffee because they test each batch for mold. Mm-hmm. And mold and germs are not something you want to be drinking. Now, I've thought in the past of starting a company where we can convince businesses that they could save money by brewing their coffee in the toilet itself. And that way they wouldn't have to pay for a Keurig machine, and they could save that money and actually wind up with cleaner coffee.
That's a tough pitch. Brewing it in a toilet.
So the problem with most coffee makers is that there are mold and germs crawling all over it.
Mhm.
And then if you look at that experience and add to it tap water, you're batting a trifecta.
You're batting 1,000 with your
Yeah, exactly.
with your crappy coffee choices. It doesn't matter how good your beans are. If you run it, as you've always said, with crappy water, if you run it through a moldy machine, you're gonna get. And people are sensitive to that. You're going to get health issues. You know, maybe you're one of these people who can do that for years and never have a problem. But you're right. That's what we see at Purity Coffee all the time. Is we independently test to make sure there's zero mycotoxin. And that's why people say every other coffee messes up my stomach. It's either the pesticides or the molds or both. And we know that the mold contributes to that reaction in the gut in some people. So again, doesn't matter how good your beans are if your machine is moldy.
Right. So when I sent you this article, I wanted to read the first four lines of this article because they really call it. If you're an avid coffee drinker, you're probably making multiple trips to the kitchen to get your fix. But have you ever thought about how dirty your home or office coffee maker can get after all those uses? Whether it's a single serve Keurig, espresso, Nespresso machine, or a traditional coffee maker, it's important to keep these appliances clean to prevent the growth of bacteria, yeast, and even mold. So, however, routine cleaning is necessary. So we've said this before. Hire somebody to come into your office to clean, or else everybody take a shift where one day everybody is in charge of cleaning it. You can't use crappy water to make coffee, and you can't use a dirty instrument to make coffee. All that moisture in that sits around in like a Keurig. I'm only using a Keurig as a name brand, not because I'm blaming them, because all the different pots and stuff out there do this.
Right.
But it's just simple to say if you're leaving a moist Keurig sitting around day after day and never popping that thing and clean the little dispenser that holds the cup, the K cup. And this is the same. Once again, if you're doing a drip coffee and you take out the drip and just throw the paper and the spent grounds into the trash can and then stick it back in, all that moisture is just going to lead to more mold. And then you add to it lousy water, you're just brewing for
Crap.
trouble. Yeah, you're just brewing crap.
So this is where I've fallen short sometimes. You're exactly right. You get that little kind of fine coffee film on the sides of the drip coffee maker, and you just throw another one in. It's early in the morning. You're lazy. You go about your day. That can build up over time. It is not a cleanly practice, and it is not what you should be doing if you are a coffee connoisseur and you want to pure a cup of coffee. Also, a lot of these coffee makers have like a descale mode. If you have not even a nicer one, like I think our $70 Cuisinart has a self-cleaning mode and a kind of descaling mode, which is important if you have crappy water like we do here, and you have to filter it heavily just to get it to normal. So running those cleaning modes, and then like Dr. Coffee said, cleaning any kind of space that you're utilizing for the brewing process, critical, absolutely critical, and often overlooked.
So let me tell you the trick that I do. And if any of your listeners want to send me an email, I'm always pumping, send me an email. Some of your people do. And if they do, I send them the stuff they ask for. And I keep up a correspondence. I got a nice guy in England that's been reading all our books, and he's just been loving it. So, if you have a need for this, just email me. There is a small little ozone generator that is used for cleaning CPAP machines.
Huh.
I don't mean the big ozone generator. I mean a small one about the size of a deck of cards. and it comes with a bag. So what we do at night in this house is we will take the things like the K cup holder, the Nespresso holder, toothbrushes, and we throw it into the bag and turn on the ozone thing and leave it on the counter down in the kitchen to do its thing. And I feel a lot of confidence in ozonation of that to kill off mold and germs.
Interesting. Pocket-sized ozone generator.
Yeah, it's great. You use it for the mask and stuff for CPAP.
Doc at Level 1 Diagnostics. That's DOC at level, the numeral 1 diagnostics.com. If you want to Dr. Coffee for any recommendations or ebooks or any of the stuff we've talked about in the past. Shout out to our listener and reader in England. Anything else on this article before we move on, Dr. Coffee?
Nope, I think we hit this.
Okay, this next one. Yeah, I had to bring this up for Dr. Coffee, of course. There is a new study out of Japan on muscle mass, specifically in middle-aged and older people, and habitual coffee consumption. This is right up your alley, man. I sent you the research study. What do you think about this research study? What does it say? Do you think it's a good study or a bad study? What do you think?
I think it was a great study. I think that I will summarize it and I'll tell you the shortfall of what they found, but I'll tell you how that shortfall is still very meaningful.
Okay.
So as a person gets older, their muscles also get older. And that includes all the muscles of the body, which includes the heart, which is a muscle. The term for it all getting weaker is called sarcopenia. Sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is the softening of muscles as one ages. What they did in this Japanese study is they knew that sarcopenia is probably mediated by inflammation. And so they did a study in which they took 45 to 75-year-old, mostly women, and they ran the study to measure those who drank coffee and those who did not. And the ones who did had less sarcopenia than the ones who did not. That's impressive.
Right.
The criticism was that it wasn't that much difference. But statistically, by statistics, we call it statistical significance. So there was statistical significance, which means that it's real. Now, they really only looked at two things, the fat index and the skeletal muscle index. And they also measured grip strength.
Right.
Cardiac muscle is different, but I think that this would easily translate over into a study on looking for congestive heart failure or looking for lack of contraction in the heart with people who drink coffee and don't drink coffee. And there actually have been some studies that looked at that showed that the heart works more effectively with up to 4 to 6 cups of coffee per day.
Jeez, that is fascinating. Yeah, you're right. A significant positive association between coffee consumption and skeletal mass index. Consumption and grip strength did not reach statistical significance. However, a positive trend was observed. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, like I said, it wasn't, oh my God, the difference is, A to B. It was really A to A plus or A to A plus. So I'm happy with the fact that they were able to see some change in sarcopenia, some increase in grip strength, and some reduction of C-reactive protein, which is the inflammatory enzyme we measure to mark inflammation.
Wow, very fascinating. I just did a an exploration on blue zones recently. I'm sure you're familiar. The areas around the globe where people live for an extraordinary amount of time. And we went to Okinawa in the grand finale, of course. And I'm not sure. I'm sure you've heard of this, but maybe for the listeners who haven't, first of all, go check out that episode. But Okinawa, one of the only kind of subcultures in Japan that drinks more coffee than tea, and they outlive their Japanese counterparts by quite some time. They also eat some weird yam instead of rice. I thought that was very fascinating. Two distinct differences between other Japanese cultures and the Okinawan culture.
Yeah, I love Okinawa. Who was the most famous person from Okinawa in the history of mankind?
Oh.
You're not going to get this, but I'm going to throw it out to you.
Is it like a grand sumo champion or something? A yokozuna of some kind? Who?
Well, you're sort of in the right ballpark.
Miyamoto Musashi?
Who's that?
That's a famous samurai. Who is it? I'm not going to be able to guess this.
Mr. Miyagi from Karate Kid.
Get out of here.
He was from Okinawa.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah. Oh, and the Tai Chi that they do there and all the martial arts. I love it. Mr. Miyagi. Wax on, wax off, baby. I love it. Coffee on, coffee off. That's what Dr. Coffee does all the time.
That's it.
Okay, real quick. Want to touch on one more before we wrap it up here?
Yeah, let's talk about the global shortage that I'm worried about.
Yeah, well, we were talking about the global shortage you were worried about last time, and then we're hit with more here. You know, last time we did a coffee news, the Brazil frost, ravaging the largest exporter of coffee. Now we're seeing concerns for Vietnam's lockdown affecting the Robusta supply, the world's largest supply of Robusta coffee, I believe. What do you think?
It's the second biggest exporter of coffee.
Wow. And I know most of it is not Arabica. What do you think of this? Is this all adding up to a big coffee shortage?
Yeah, so I think we need to figure out how to preserve roasted coffee beans for a long period of time so that we can start hoarding them. No, nobody needs to go out and hoard them, but we are going to see that prices will rise for coffee, I predict. Probably about 20% increase in prices, which would be the offset from what's happening in global coffee market. And we're not going to really notice that big of a shortage, but we are going to notice a small shortage, I think, unless the crap hits the fan again and something like another drought or some other kind of climate change hits. But we've got Brazil that has damaged crops from unseasonable weather that we talked about in the past. And now we've got Vietnam, which is the big producer of Robusta.
Wow. It's
a hardier bean. It's bitter. And it's used to make instant coffee, espresso, and a filler for some blends. That all comes from Vietnam, and that is going to take a hit.
And if you're thinking like, I don't drink that type of coffee, it affects the whole market, right? Because more people move over to a different source, and it's like a domino effect.
Yeah, Robusta is used. I mean, you're going to buy some blends that you look at the label real closely, and they have Robusta in it. They're not going to have as much Robusta. They're going to have to start cutting it with like fentanyl or something.
Robusta. We should do a whole episode on the different species, because I mean, it does get a bad name for a couple different reasons, but there are supposedly some studies that show that it has high levels of certain medicinal compounds, and we've been taking a look at that with our different health blends. But really interesting. We should probably dive into that. You're right, though. To address what you said a second ago, Brazil, number 1 coffee producing country in the world, and number 2, Vietnam, number 3, Colombia. Yeah, you're right. What if something bad happens in Colombia or another frost hits Brazil? I'm worried that there's more to come, and that could cause a real shortage or prices to really skyrocket like gas can do or something like that,
Yeah. So, before we close out here, I just want to give a shout out to veteran roasters out of Chicago. So they're a coffee roaster. Their name is Veteran Roasters.
Yes.
And they've been taking military veterans, people that have come from places like Afghanistan and are having trouble with the world, with fitting back in. And they've been, the guy's name is Brandon Marty, and he's been taking the veterans and has been giving them jobs. Not only giving them jobs, I don't mean just sit here and grind some beans. I mean, he's been having them go to farms in Brazil and Papua New Guinea and learning how to pick good beans and learning how to roast good. He's really been making a career for them. So I want to give a big shout out to him.
Absolutely love it. Veteran Chicago Roasters. And you're right. Helping veterans adjust back to civilian life and giving them life skills. And that's where a lot of the institutions fail. And that's where I love to see these charitable organizations step in and pick up the slack that should have been taken care of. But you're right. Thank you, and shout out to Veteran Roasters here in Chicago. Multiple features of charitable coffee companies here in Chicago we've done now, and this is a great example again.
Great.
That is all for today, everybody. That's all the coffee news we have, Dr. Coffee. We depleted the news cycle.
I know. We'll see you in a month. We'll do coffee news again.
We'll turn this into a 24-hour news feed is what we'll do. 24-hour coffee news. I'm sure Dr. Coffee would love that. All right, everybody. That's all for now. Thank you so much for hanging with us. This is Dr. Coffee and Jordan River signing off, wishing you an extraordinary day. We'll see you next time on the Coffee Healthy Science Podcast. Bye-bye.